Okay, let's get started. It's a workshop with the City Council, Fire Department, Alina, and the City Gate consultant and staff. If we could take the roll.
Here.
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 Here. We want to stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, let's take just a moment, go around the room and do some introductions. Start on this side here.
I'm William Reynolds. I am the administrator for the city of Shakopee.
Jim Delaney, I'm one of the city council members.
Joe Simon, Deputy Fire Chief.
Dave Giddings, Deputy Fire Chief.
Kurt Widener, Alina Health EMS Operations Manager.
Kevin Miller, Director of Operations and Deputy Chief for Alina EMS.
Jay Whiting, City Council Member.
Angelica Contreras, City Council.
Jesse Lara, City Council.
Matt Lehman, Shakopee Mayor. Thank you, everybody. Item number 4 brings us to our workshop. The reason we're here.
Approve the agenda, please, sir.
Oh, number 3, I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second?
I'll make a second.
Is there, did you get that? Any discussion on the motion? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 4, workshop. Workshop to discuss the structural changes to the fire department. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and our guests. Essentially, what we're here to discuss is the future of the fire department. As we look to the future, I think it's important we kind of really quickly wrap up where we are now and how we got here. As part of the Citygate study, during the course of that study, there were several occasions where Citygate had identified things that they believed we needed to act on immediately, and those generally operated around the issues of training. When the study actually came out, they had multiple areas of concerns that they had. Essentially, they were the management and culture, accountability, and quality control. Number 2 was the adherence to safety and standards. And number 3 was the adequate staffing and deployment of our fire forces. I'm happy to report that items 1 and 2 are generally have been addressed at this point. And part of that came into several things, including the creation of our 2 deputy chief positions, and our deputy chiefs are with us today. The dissolution of the fire relief and the hire of part-time firefighters, and that was to address some of our issues with the Fair Labor Standards Act. The hire of 3 full-time captains, which we have in force in the process of doing. We applied for a SAFER grant. Now, the SAFER grant itself was only applied for so that, depending on what the council decided to do, we wanted to make sure that we were in the mix for a SAFER grant, and so that was simply due to a matter of timing. Now, ultimately, it's up to council to determine what, if anything, we do with that grant if we get it, but we wanted to make sure that we had that as a possibility. We have added an administrative assistant for the department. We are in the process of hiring a fire chief, and we have renovation of fire station number 1 going on as we speak as well. So when we look at the future of the fire service in Shakopee going forward, it's important to understand that as we make this transition, there are some firefighters that will not wish to continue their service. We understand that. We certainly hope that anyone that's willing to move forward under the guidelines that we're putting in place to be a more professional department will, in fact, stay with us. And we very much want all of those current firefighters to remain part of our system. Ultimately, fire service deployment, which is generally what we're talking about tonight, as Citygate lined out, is about speed and the weight of the response to emergencies. They pointed out, yes, sir.
Define weight.
Weight is defined in the Citygate study, and I can go ahead and
Staffing.
Yeah, Stu, go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah,
the author of the
it's
study can.
a combination of more than one piece of equipment with more than one crew. So traditionally to a building fire, that would be 3 or 4 units with 15 people. So the weight's both the total head count and the fact that the heads arrive on more than one unit.
Thank you, sir. So essentially, Citygate pointed out that Shakopee's total response time is significantly slower than the best practice recommendations that currently exist. They defined our current risk, they stated in the report that our current risk exposure needs are not being met by the model being employed at this time. They recommend a combination of full-time and part-time personnel to ensure adequate first unit speed of response and an effective response force, weight of response. As they noted in one of their key findings of fact, Shakopee is not currently capable of fielding an effective multiple unit response, and the burden on our part-time firefighters is at its limit. So, you know, as we begin this discussion, I think regardless of where we end up, it's important that we are open with our community and ensure that they understand exactly what they can expect from our fire and other emergency services as we move forward. We need to be sure that we are communicating our expectations to them so they know for whatever incident is out there, what they can expect to be there on scene. So my thought is the best way we can probably start this discussion is to actually talk about an incident that just happened last week that was a great way of showing how our individual units and partners work together. Now, it's important to understand as we start out that oftentimes police are your first people that are on scene. And as such, they are trained to deliver a basic first aid on scene. We currently have EMTs in our fire department, which is generally our second phase that will arrive, and they have a higher level of training as EMTs. So they actually can provide a form of life-saving work on scene. And then, of course, our partners at Alina are paramedics, and they have a much higher training, but as you all understand, they have multiple calls on occasion, and at times we are waiting for them to be on call based upon the other call load. And so they will always, for the most part, be the last people on scene. So at 1:30 on April 18th, we had an incident that occurred. And Joe, if you want to kick it off and kind of talk about what happened and all of the units responding and what occurred during that thing, I think it'll give us a good idea of how everything works together.
Yeah, so on Thursday of last week, we had a structure fire, called for a structure fire. The on-duty crew had just completed an inspection, and we're actually not too far away. They got there shortly after the police department did, and they were able to make entry very quickly. One of the officers was ready when we arrived to force open that front door. We didn't know if we had victims at that time. And so he did that. He forced open the front door. We were able to make entry. This was a townhome complex. And so we were able to contain it to that one unit, which is phenomenal. They did a really good job. And then we did a search for victims, and we found a dog. It was still breathing. We pulled it out. We didn't find any other victims, thankfully. Pulled out the dog, and then Alina was right there to help with rescue efforts for the dog. So that's one example, and it's a structure fire example, so different than kind of what we have been talking about with medicals or car crashes. We're talking about a structure fire, and still equally important that everybody's there and we're working together as a team, and it just makes the job that much easier for us. So,
Joe, that's normal operating procedure. First thing is going to be rescue, and then it's going to be put out the fire, correct?
yep, exactly.
So you need people on the scene to make sure everybody's clear of that building first, correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, Citygate did come up with a plan. I say a plan because it is a plan. It's not necessarily the right plan for the city. That's ultimately up for the council to determine. But I just wanted to hit the highlights of that particular plan as they've laid it out. They would recommend in hiring 2 firefighter positions as soon as possible. In 2025, they would look for the addition of 1 fire inspector, 3 fire captains, and 6 firefighters, and that would essentially allow us then to work out of both stations. In 2026, they would add another 6 firefighters to increase both the engine crews to 4, which is 1 captain and 3 firefighters for each on-duty, each one of the 2 on-duty departments that we have, or units, I should say. And then in 2027, they would add 3 battalion chiefs for 27-7-365 immediate response, command, and oversight. That is certainly a healthy plan, but again, it's all about what the expectations of this council are and the expectations of our residents are. So if we could, maybe we could talk a little bit with our partners at Alina, and you could kind of tell us a little bit about your role, what you do, and even our working relationship, if you don't. Yes, sir.
Before we do that, in the city, and Ms. Stewart, you may want to pop in on this one too. In the Citygate study with this recommendation, as you just laid out, is that assuming that Shakopee Fire will be taking over more of the medical from Alina, or is this assuming business as usual, partners with Alina?
Stewart, I believe this is business as usual, but I'll allow you to chime in.
Absolutely, for 2 reasons it's worth briefly expanding upon. Alina gave us their data, very openly, transparently, great cooperators. They are already going to low acuity medical calls without fire or police. That data is in the report. We recommended the minimum staffing 24/7, 365 to give you an effective response team for serious incidents, be they medical, fires, technical rescues, such as an auto accident or a commercial industrial building, without waiting for the thinning paid on call force to come from home. So we also separately in the report, back to weight of attack, gave you the small numbers of people responding from home within a reasonable number of minutes to get the weight of attack. And that weight of personnel to critical incidents is not occurring today. So that's the more primary reason not to take on more EMS. Having said that, you do go to EMS events today and would allow a slight increase to fire, given you're going to have the staffing in the stations, freeing up police from minor to modest EMS events to give them more proactive police patrol time. So it's a win-win. If you're going to staff for speed and weight of attack for any kind of occurrence, you will then also have some immediate capacity to assist Alina more over your police department.
Thank you.
Well, before I get too bogged down here, I'm going to ask questions as we go so we don't have to keep notes and come up at the end, although I did bring some that I want to hit. The first question I have is why would some of our current firefighters not wish to stay?
It's a change of culture, sir. And frankly, the whole profession of firefighting has changed dramatically. And I think the reality is that other pressures, family pressures, job pressures, and recognizing that it's not something that they wish to continue to do anymore.
Most have all full-time jobs on
Correct.
the side,
Yes, sir.
Okay,
maybe
and
better pay.
then the second question I had written down was, and this might be for either Stuart or fire guys, when we talk about weight, multiple unit responses, to me, I'm thinking that's situational, because there's situations where you don't need a multiple vehicle response. First thing that comes to mind is the call where I fell and I can't get up. I mean, are we gonna send the police, the fire, and the EMS all to help somebody stand back up? Right?
Whose crystal ball are we gonna use to predict these things?
Well, and that's another topic of discussion that I wrote down. So that begs the question of, out of all the calls that the data that we have, if you break it all down, which I did ask to do, how many are actual situations that need multiple unit responses? Over a,
It's not so much multiple units, it's multiple calls. We routinely have multiple calls happening at the same time. And I forget, what was your earlier comment, Mayor, that you had?
the weighted based on situation for multiple unit responses, where some calls for service are not a situation that needs multiple response
Correct.
units.
Yeah, and the reality is we'll send what is needed for that particular call.
A block alarm or
You know, and sometimes we'll get the initial information from the 911 dispatch, and if it's, for example, they're calling in that we have a structure fire that's currently fully engulfed or well on its way, that's
They see smoke even.
that's a multiple vehicle
was that two pumpers and
incident.
a ladder rescue?
Okay,
Yep, yeah, exactly. We'll get 2 engines and a ladder for sure.
So each incident has a response.
And it may be that police are on scene and say, this is what was originally dispatched, but we actually need more, or there's a
Or
different
less.
situation, or less.
it's a grill out back, it's okay, you know,
So, you know, it is situational.
okay?
But the key is having the forces in place to be able to address what's coming up. And I should point out that this is nothing new. Both Prior Lake and Savage have already done this exercise. The SMSC has had it in place for some time. So our neighboring communities have already went through what we are contemplating.
You're talking about going to full-time?
Correct.
Okay,
So if maybe we can have Alina jump in and talk a little bit about what you do and how you interact with the Shakopee Fire Department.
Okay. So really to answer your question, Mayor, about, you know, you talk about somebody that's fallen, you don't need everybody. It's more about the response because we don't always know what the problem is. They might have fallen because they had a heart attack, or they've gone unconscious because of cardiac arrest, or maybe they just fell getting out of bed and they just need help getting up. And oftentimes we might need everybody, and then there's times where we will, you know, police will go, we help them up, or fire gets there, and the same thing, they help them up, they don't want an ambulance, and they cancel us. Likewise, if we get there on scene first, we oftentimes will cancel police and fire if we don't need them. So that happens on a daily basis, multiple times a day, where these agencies do get sent, but it is the who can get there first and to determine exactly what is going on and how high acuity of call this is, because we don't always get the caller to determine that. Sometimes we just get the address, we get, you know, what they think the issue is, and then that's it. And so we really don't know, and we're going in blind. But other times we do get the calls. where we get to talk to the caller or even the patient and find out what's going on, and sometimes we have a better idea even before they get there. Okay, the ambulance is just enough for that.
Yeah, and I say that because I know from personal experience with neighbors that, you know, there are those that constantly have police, fire, ambulance, whoever, help them out. A lot of times. Matter of fact, sometimes it's a neighbor helping out, get them back up on their feet. And that's all I need is somebody to help them up. That's it. And it seems like a kind of a waste to send all this resources to something so simple. That's,
Well, it's my mom.
well, I mean, it was a neighbor in one case, it was my mother in a few cases, and it was a neighbor to another location, so, which,
You know what I mean?
Needed two
If it's
people
your
because they
family,
were-
It's a different story.
they're
You want
heavier
everything
than,
coming.
heavier than the engine block. But anyway, and I don't know the best approach to this. I don't know if any council members came with a list of thoughts and comments and questions. I did. I don't know if I just throw them all out there, or if we walk through this process and go down my list at the end. What's the best approach?
Well, why don't we allow Alina
Okay.
to kind of,
Yeah,
To kind of go a little bit further with, you know, the issue itself may not be that big of a deal with the person. You look at what's, how high acuity the call is, might be something where they need to go and be evaluated. And yes, the ambulance could handle it in a perfect situation of getting out of the, whatever facility they're at, but we need fire to help get the patient out safely. And so that, you know, we're not getting hurt, fire's not getting hurt, and we don't cause any further injury to the patient. So there's a lot of times that they're coming to help with that type of stuff. You know, there's situations where law enforcement go before us to, you know, we don't know how safe it is to enter a particular situation. So they go and they make it, determine that it's safe enough for us to enter. That happens a lot. You know, same thing on the fire side with fire, you know, okay, there's a CO alarm and people feeling ill, they will go into the facilities, get the patients out, or determine whether or not it's safe for us to come in.
So you guys are located in Savage. That's where you have a base.
We have, our main base is Savage, so report to work location is Savage.
Do you have some other, you're at the hospital, I assume, on a regular basis, so do you stay there, or you just?
Nope, we station out of Shakopee Station 2.
That's right, okay.
We also have, we do sometimes station out of the Savage base, but we have 3 locations in Bloomington that we will station at. We also have a base of operations in, at the airport, and we also have a location at Prior Lake.
So
Fire
as
Station.
things are heating up, let's say you got a lot of calls, assets are moving here and there. As Shakopee grows, is there a plan in place to add more assets to Shakopee or this area? Or how is that?
The simple answer is yes. That's our hope. You know, the issue we run into is staffing. You know, can we get the people? You know, and Kevin can maybe speak to the kind of the numbers that we have lost over the course, you know, since COVID. It really has taken its toll on EMS in particular, and I know a lot of other industry as well, and police and fire, where people just don't want to be doing this anymore because of the risks. So Kevin can talk about some of the numbers and whatnot.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, council members. This is not just an Alina issue, this is a national issue, where we're seeing, in healthcare in general, we're seeing this huge exodus, which began with COVID. We're starting to see a bit of a rebound at this point, but it's going to take us years, ultimately, to get a workforce that reflects the work that's actually happening right now. We run our crews very, very hard. They run a lot of calls every day. It's not uncommon for a 12-hour shift to do 12 or more calls in that shift. Now, we may get a couple of cancels in that time period as well, but it is not like how it was even 5 years ago, where you might do 6 calls in that time period. So what we do, we look at the numbers literally every month. So we look at how many calls a particular jurisdiction has by day, by hour, and by time of the year. So during the winter, you're going to see some, like, response times will tend to slow down simply because we have a lot of snow. Particularly last year, when we had all the snow. This year, not so much. You know, it was a little better this year. But we do look at a lot of that data, and we really watch and we predict that data, and we know how many trucks we need per hour of day of week. And we build our schedules to accommodate that overall. And as Kurt alluded to, some days we may be at 80% of our staffing, other days we are at 92, 94% of their staffing. We're rarely at 100% of our staffing overall. And that's, again, true across the industry, whether it's the hospital. You'll see a lot of hospitals just looking for people to get a bed. They'll wait in the emergency room 8, 10, 12, 14 hours. Mental health care patients are waiting days to weeks for beds overall. So for your city to be able to assist in whatever capacity you folks deem necessary is absolutely helpful to your residents, for certain. If we do have somebody who has fallen, we don't know how long necessarily they've been on that floor overall. Think about laying on a concrete or tile floor, or just laying on the floor, not being able to move with a fracture. That's just something you want to address as soon as possible. We don't necessarily have to go lights and siren to that, but we want a pretty quick response to get that person off the floor. It's just common decency. So we do rely on our partner agencies to make those decisions. We don't set those for communities overall, but what I'll tell you, what you are looking at is exactly what we're seeing most of the metro cities follow at this point. So while we are continuing to do a lot of work far as recruitment, retention, Alina also, we provide medical oversight for 3 of the college paramedic programs here in the Twin Cities. We are actively working to bring EMTs into paramedic roles. Scholarships are abundant at this point. We actually pay staff now to go to school. I mean, we're doing everything we can to try to get people in the door overall and retain them. So, and the wages, we're just wrapping up a contract negotiation with our union, and significant increases in wages, very significant. So that's kind of what we do, but ultimately we really do rely on the city to set those standards. You are going to have a lot of different options in the proposal, I believe. One of the things, if we do get the caller, that call comes to us from the county, we're able to run them through an acuity process. This is a national standard that we utilize to identify whether or not we do have to run. You know, this is somebody who's choking. Chokings are immediate, life-threatening situations. Anaphylaxis, life-threatening. Bleeding, life-threatening. Anaphylaxis, I'm sorry, shock due to like a bee sting, okay?
Closing up.
Right. Those are things that need immediate responses, right? And if we are 8, 10, 12, we are at your community 90% of the time in less than 13 minutes, okay? Sometime less than that, 90% of the time or more. So in that time, your staff would be able to even deliver some of the epinephrine that is necessary in those situations. And we see a lot of partner agencies working to put more medications on their first responder trucks for those time life emergencies overall. So, because it does get challenging for us to get there.
Can you explain a little bit on how you're paid? The contract, is it on call for the, you know, how does Shakopee utilize your services?
So far as all of my staff are full-time, so we are paid 100%. All my staff are part of the International Association of EMTs and Paramedics, the IAAP. Their local is 167. Far as how we get paid, we do not take a subsidy from any municipality. All of our revenue is generated through the transport of that patient overall. So on average, people often complain about their ambulance bill. An average bill for us on a base rate would be probably $2,300, $2,400, which I will tell you in the industry is actually it's on the low side. It's not uncommon to see just base rate, even for municipal services, well over $3,000, okay? But much like your bill in the hospital, it may be X, but you might end up having to pay once it gets deducted and all the changes. On average, we in this community is about 33 cents on the dollar is what we get paid overall.
Everybody, all the insurance companies
Fight, or we have a lot of bad debt. So you cannot do a wallet biopsy on any patient, right, to make sure they have or do not have insurance. That is part of the responsibility of having essentially monopolistic oversight of a particular area. You take the good with the bad, right, whether you get paid. We're not, so we have to take that. We also can't balance bills. So for example, anything that's Medicare, Medicaid related, which is about 60% of all of our patients.
Closer to the mic.
Sorry. But 60, 65, depending on the community, percent of our patients are government payers. And of that, Medicare is about a 82% discount. Minnesota Medicaid's almost a 91% discount to those wages overall. And really, frankly, the only way you make up the difference is by doing volume. That's how you do it. The only thing that pays 100% is if you have a crash and your car, and we get to your personal injury protection before the chiropractors or anybody else gets on there. Yes.
Okay. Any questions for Alina? Did council members have? I practice what I preach. I didn't. It's a good habit to put it up so that I'm not speaking over somebody else. Any council members have questions that they put together for this workshop, or questions for Alina? Or I can go down the list of things that I came up with on my own. Some of them have nothing to do with Alina. They're more internal for us as a council and staff. Others are with the partnership stuff. Mr. Reynolds, do you want me to go with stuff that's internal, or should I kind of break it down into the partnership side?
However you want to do it,
Okay.
Mayor, it's pretty loose,
I'm just gonna go down some of the thoughts that I have. And obviously, we know that workshops, we typically don't make decisions. We get the thought process bubbling for items and issues for people to think about. First I had was the financing. Obviously, there's additional cost. How are we going to pay for it? Will there be offsets necessary to prevent huge tax increases? If there are offsets, what are the suggested offsets? Policy questions that I'm still working through are 12-hour shifts versus 8-hour shifts. It was explained to me by our interim fire chief. It hasn't sunk in and settled, so I asked for a better model on that. I haven't received that yet, and so I'm still working through that.
If I can just touch on that a little bit.
Yes.
Really, the difference between 8 and 12 hours is finance. Essentially, it's cheaper to have the 12 hours than the 8 hours.
Yeah, and I don't get it, because if you're working somebody 2,080 hours a year, whether they're working 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day, the hours at the end of the year are the same.
It's the amount of personnel that you would need.
Right, but the hours are the same.
The hours are the same, but you have more personnel in order to fill the shifts.
Right, but if the hours are the same, the financial aspect should be the same, and it gives you a larger pool if you have to have somebody on vacation or call
can add-
people in or whatever.
Right now, we got a smorgasbord of shifts, and I think it really depends on your staffing. And I think those kind of decisions might be best, working with the staff on and the new fire
Well,
chief.
absolutely, and that's why I said I'm just throwing this stuff out there. I'm not here to fix or make decisions on these things.
No, but Stuart, can you chime in about the difference between 8 and 12 hours, please?
Well, please, yeah, I turned the camera on for a reason. It's not even the difference between 8 and 12. And you asked us a very spot-on, Mayor, question about equivalent cost to hours of coverage in a year. Decades ago, the federal government passed a law establishing a minimum work week in the United States, beyond which overtime, premium pay would be paid. That law, approximately 30 plus years ago, give or take 25 years ago, was spread to every public sector government agency in the United States. So what that law says is you have to define a pay period, which is a work week, a 7-day work week. And if you work more than 40 hours in a work week, you must pay time and a half. And simplifying a couple minor variations, but hold that thought. It's not the hours in a year, it's how much I pay per hour within a work period. The only benevolent thing the feds did when they extended that law to state and local government was they exempted, there's a whole clause in the law called the 7K exemption, that exempts police and firefighters from the 40-hour work week. Firefighting, because the 24-hour minimum response coverage necessary, the exemption initially made the federal work week for firefighters 63 hours before overtime is incurred. It's now at 53 hours a week. To staff a fire department 24/7, the least expensive per hour cost to do so is to establish 3 crews that rotate on a 24-hour schedule, 24 on, 24 off. In that rotational plan, the work week is 56 hours. With a 53-hour federal work week, I pay straight time for the first 53 hours, and then I pay an additional half time for the remaining 3. The 56-hour rotating shift plan is the least total expensive in the United States, and 95% of career staff fire departments in the United States take advantage of the 7K federal wage and hour exemption to come up with annual compensation for firefighters. So you're absolutely correct. There's only so many hours in a year, 24/7 times 365. But what you pay per hour matters. See, if you lower the work week, as some New York state agencies do in the city and county of San Francisco, there's another model out there called the 42-hour work week or variations of it. To staff a 42-hour work week without the overtime being exorbitant, you have to staff a 4th platoon. So you have to add more people to cover the hours. And when you add more people, you increase your pension, workers' comp, and health care obligations and liability for injury. So back to what does the majority of the United States do? Least expensive to have a smaller number of people, 3 rotating crews, pay straight time for as much as you can, and don't have more people than you really need under pension and workers' comp coverage. I hope that helps. So the math gets difficult, but it's the cost per hour, not the cost per year.
So let me 2 clarifying questions. The 7K policy would also apply to an 8-hour shift, to where the 8-hour shift would also be able to work past up to 53 at standard rate.
No.
Why not?
You have to define a work period, and a work period is 7 days.
Right, and 7 times 8 is what?
No. You have to, it's 40 hours in a smaller work period.
Well, 7 times
So-
8 is 56. And
I understand, but the way the exemption math works, you're in excess of 40 hours in the work period, but a 3-crew rotating 24 on, 24 off schedule doesn't give you 56 hours in a week. It gives you 56 hours in 24 to 27 days, depending on the repeat of the 3-person schedule. I was trying to stay out of the swamp of that math. So if I'm going to put somebody on a 24-hour rotation, fewer people rotating, the feds under 7K say establish a work period of anywhere from 24 to 28 days. And you average work weeks within that period, but you don't pay overtime until you hit the cap period of, let's say, 27, 28 days. So some weeks, a rotating shift firefighter will pull 2 shifts, 48 hours. Some 7-day periods, they might pull 3, but it doesn't matter. The employer sits there and says, every 28 days, how many hours did you average? And then they apply the straight time or the premium time payment. If you go with 8, 10, 12 hours, you will need 2 or 3 crews per day, right? Classic daytime swing shift graveyard, or you can do a police department schedule of 10 or 12 hours, and then a second crew comes in for the other 10 or 12 hours.
Okay, so the second follow-up question is, when you say 24 on, 24 off, I was thinking somebody's working for 24 hours, and how productive can they be in 24 hours because they can't stay up all day?
Absolutely. There is sleeping time involved, and it's accommodated for two reasons. One,
Well, wait a
total
minute,
head
let's back up here. Are you saying that you schedule somebody for 24 hours to be on the job for 24 hours nonstop?
Yes.
Yeah, they're at the
Yes,
station,
and
right?
they're-
That's
and
why
they're-
we're remodeling the station, so they could sleep there and be on call.
Yes, they have to sleep.
But then
The feds
but we also talk about 12-hour shifts. So is it a 12-hour shift or is it a 24-hour shift?
The common American Fire Service schedule, the reasons I stated, is a 24-hour shift. And you sleep on duty in a bunk room, you have a locker room, you have cleanup, shower, restroom facilities. It's a home. You stay for anywhere from 24, depending on the rotation plane in the United States, maybe up to 48 hours. You're on duty. You're not home. You're not coming from home or business. When you do that, yes, you have to accommodate sleeping. And yes, they will wake up in sleep periods to go to an emergency. So the sleep periods are accommodated in America for two reasons. One, it's again a less expensive model in total. Two, to have an immediate reaction force. So you don't have folks getting paged at home in the middle of the night or in the middle of the workday, and they make a decision, I can't come right now. I have other family work obligations. I'll let somebody else do the dispatch. I can't do it. Most communities, your size, smaller and larger, field an on-duty instant response protective force, 24/7, 365, for a guaranteed prompt response. And you heard Alina say, in so many words, faster than Alina can get to every neighborhood all of the time. So you're not just purchasing active, I used them this much, little or big. You're purchasing a safety blanket across the geography that problems, big or small, 24/7, get an immediate response.
Food budget.
Quick question, quick question. How many, was like 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 3 days off? What kind of
24
rotation?
on, 24 off.
So it's 24 and 24, 1 day on, 1 day off, like that?
Well, to work out the math, and Chief Simon's more than capable of explaining in person. Putting some X's and O's real quick on a dry erase board. There are 3 crews that rotate. So 2 crews are always 24 on, 24 off, right? Toggling back and forth. Crew number 3 has hit an hours cap, and they get 3 or 4 days off. And when they re-enter the on-off pattern, another crew goes off. So you have to see a color-coded 30-day calendar to see the repeats between A crew, B division, and C division. At any given moment, back-to-back days, 2 of the 3 crews are trading off. Crew number 3 is getting some extra days off, or their math is going to hit the overtime payment levels.
First question is for the fire department. Do you guys see a slower response during the winter? In terms of like, you guys are at home, you get a page, you need to come in. Is it due to like wintry roads and whatnot? Are you guys seeing a slower response to people showing up to the station?
And I guess that's all dependent on the actual environmental situations,
Right.
right? But as far as whether it's wintertime or summertime, I would say probably the summertime is worse because people are, out
Further
doing
away.
sports for children or at the cabin or away for the weekends and stuff like that. So I would definitely say it's not just seasonal related, but it's just overall.
Waiting to fill the truck kind of thing?
Yeah, yep. And just to address, Mayor, I believe that maybe the confusion you were asking about the 12 hours, that was for the requirement for the part-time shifts. So that would be the shift difference for the 24 to the 12 hours.
Well, regardless.
Just to clarify that.
Regardless, I'm certainly going to need more information on that. The charts would be great. I've asked for that in the past, and I'll have to get that so I can better understand it.
Yep, that was gonna be my next statement is, would we all agree to direct staff to create an illustration of the two models of what that would essentially look like?
Yeah, we'll get that.
Oh,
That should be done, yeah.
I don't think we need to
Because
direct it. I think we're here to have this discussion, and staff is
That's
picking
got to
up
be
on
out
these.
there. So.
Yeah, we got to fully understand it. When Stuart says, I don't want to get into the swamp on this, it's unfortunate because I tried to get my head around it, but I need more information, so I guess I have to be in the swamp.
Well, this is going to change too. We're not going to be at that level until,
Right.
if we go this direction,
Right.
until potentially 2027. I think we could get there in 2026, but without the battalion chiefs. But
And there's other options, so we have to take a look at it so that we're totally informed on exactly what it is that we're seeking to do. So that's just my last comment on that topic.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, we have part-time firefighters that work full-time for other agencies, Prior Lake, Savage, Egan, and they work a 24-hour rotating shift. And we've had discussions with them on what that schedule looks like, and we could very easily provide that to you.
That'd be great.
I got a question, and probably for staff. It goes back to the scenario from the other day. And Stuart, you feel free to jump in here, but you had mentioned the truck was off, the duty crew was off doing inspections, I think you said.
Correct.
How often does either the inspections get delayed, or are we off on some other part of the city doing inspections when we get a call and got to drop everything and run? The question, because we're getting to that point where we're looking at that fire inspector in 2025, and we also got to plan ahead for, our fire marshal isn't getting any younger, so we want to plan ahead and maybe grow a staff of inspection, I think, to kind of fill that position eventually. I'm not pushing you out, Tom. Well, take your time. But I'm looking at that inspection saying, why is our duty crew doing that? Is that an interference, and should we move that up, or
Well, that is one of the things that Stewart's organization pointed out as a problem, that quite literally they're doing inspections, businesses schedule an inspection, they get a call, they can't make it, or they have to leave during the middle of the inspection. Gents, I mean, how often do you run into that?
Daily.
Daily, it's an issue where we have to either drop the ball on one or the other, and obviously we don't want to drop the ball on the call, the emergency side, so usually it's the latter that gets neglected.
And this is fire inspection, or is it part of the building inspection?
No, this is fire.
Fire, both, I suppose.
Fire.
you know.
What aspect of fire inspection are we talking? Because you have a couple different things here.
That's
You
what I was
have,
looking
you have somewhere the fire department goes into a business to look and see where things are stored.
Pre-plan.
So that if there is a fire, they know that side of the building has got this kind of chemical, or it might have this kind of explosive or something over here. So that they have a better plan on if they have to come to this site in the future, that they know what they're up against and where it is.
Does that happen as often as it?
So-
That's true, yep, and it's called pre-fire planning, and it
Okay.
is something that we do, and a lot of times it's tied in together with an inspection. So we're doing an inspection and we're pre-fire planning at the same time.
Then you have building burned down. Question is why? And now you have an investigation.
Inspection, yeah, or fire investigation, yeah.
Okay, and state fire inspector does that a lot of times. Sometimes cities do it themselves.
How
or
do we handle it, both?
It depends. You know, if it's a
Our
city.
city
if it's a
fire marshal investigates fires that we have. If there's anything, if it's a fire death, then we'll call in the state fire marshal to help.
Or
out.
if there's a conflict, if it's a city building, obviously you'd have somebody up from the
suppose, sure.
outside, just like we do if it's a police investigation or something like that.
I just want to give a little, so when I did my ride-along, my ride-along was to go to, with the crew to the new Triple Crown apartments. And what they ended up doing, because of the scale of the project, everyone that was on duty at that time went to that site. They brought the new medical response truck, and then they brought a fire engine. And they all took, to divvy up to take less time, they all took a floor. And during that time while we were there, they actually did get a medical call, and two people did have to drop what they were doing to leave the site to go to that medical call. So I can attest that that does happen. I mean, it happened that day I was there. So, yeah, I couldn't see why.
Well, that's a common sense priority thing.
Right.
I mean, the inspection nobody's gonna die if you don't do it right this minute.
Right.
Right? Your basement's flooding, go out to eat.
You know, we've got a good plan put out from Citygate, and it can be adjusted, I think, through some of our own. And internal audits and things like that, a new fire chief coming on. I think what our goal here is to say, hey, you know what, we're gonna budget this. We're gonna put this, hey, 2025, we're gonna budget this. 2026, we're gonna budget this, and this, either it does come from, it's gonna come from the taxes, and whether we offset it or not. I don't see how something should, this should be a win-lose. We know where we're at, what we need. I can't say, oh, we're gonna cut some fire people, we're not gonna buy a plow truck here or there. These are needs we have. And unfortunately, a growing city is gonna come with some growing pains.
I will say, we just today updated our comparable cities tax relationship graphs, and we are significantly, we have fallen in our taxes significantly from all of our other comparable cities. We remain at the bottom when it comes to taxes on our individuals, our residents, and you know, it literally is, we have the capacity to have a professional fire department, and you know, ultimately it is the decision of this council if that's what you want or not.
It's in our
From a
community,
tax standpoint, even with what we're looking at, Nate is going to kill me, but you know, as we're looking, even with our union negotiations and where they're going to put us, there's a very good possibility that yet again we will have another tax cut next year, and that's just fiscal reality. And so you know, money is always a concern for staff and this organization, as you can tell by my constant repeating of where we stand when it comes to taxes. But we're talking about the lives and safety of our residents, and the most fundamental thing that a city can do is to ensure that it provides a safe community. And whether that be medical or whether that be fire, the reality is that we certainly can afford this. We continue to be the lowest taxed of our comparable cities and one of the lowest taxed communities in this metro area.
largest tourism, major attractions.
And we're
have
also
to-
working on those other issues that we've talked about you know, a visitor's tax of some sort, and we're continuing to work with that in the state level. So
I'm saying we have a lot of outside forces, we have a lot of industry, we potentially have a lot of exposure.
Absolutely, and the reality is, you know, that this can be done, I believe, with minimal bottom line impact to taxpayers.
Yep.
But that should not be the only concern.
The residents are expecting a change. I mean, it's been in, several different newspapers of the study, so they are aware that something is coming and that we are trying to rectify the situation. So it's something's expected to be done, and not just let it sit. So.
And I just wanted to add, all our residents are taxpayers. I don't know how I would say, well, the east side gets services, yes, yet the west side doesn't get services. So we have to serve, like we said, it's a need, and we have to serve everyone equally. So,
Are we not serving?
well, no, I mean, we are.
Well, I think
But
it's
like
clear that
with the
there's
time and-
multiple concerns as outlined from the Citygate study. And, you know, before, we didn't know.
Right.
Now we know. And, you know, we have a responsibility to address it in some manner.
So let me throw out some of my questions here. And like I said, some are internal, some are for Alina and other partners, dispatch being one of them. Sleeping areas are for only on duty, not public or family. Do we have controls, verifications? What are the penalties? And designated family areas within our fire buildings.
It is for on-duty personnel.
I just haven't
Any-
seen these
any-
policies.
I'm sure
Any
that's-
situation that would occur would be dealt with, frankly, like we dealt with the last one.
And that's why I want to see strong policies, and I haven't seen that.
I'm sure there's
so.
some boilerplate stuff out there that you
Yep.
guys can get a hold of.
We actually currently have policies in place.
Okay.
We've been, I mean, we've been
Have we adopted it? Because I haven't seen these.
We've been sleeping
Yep.
at the fire station for 4 years, so
Right.
we've had to have things in place that cover that.
Okay, so when were these passed? I'll go back in
Sure,
the
HR
records
is
and look.
involved.
No,
and all
these
that.
weren't city council policies, these are internal fire department policies.
Okay.
Not every policy comes before the city council
Well,
for
it would be in
approval.
an employee handbook, right?
No, those are internal, it's an internal fire department policy because we don't have people sleeping in city hall or other places. It only deals with the fire
Okay,
department.
well, I'm gonna need to see these policies. We don't allow alcohol on a premises, do we?
No, we do not.
Okay. Liability and indemnification of personnel in Alina ambulances. If our people are riding to the hospital in an ambulance with Alina, do we have indemnification?
Indemnification.
They'd be
That's
covered
it.
for under ours, wouldn't they?
All organizations are insured, and if there's an incident that occurs, the insurance will address those particular issues.
Okay, and how often does that happen? Because now we're taking a crew and we're breaking it up to where it can't go to another incident, and under the 2 in, 2 out,
Is that when they're doing CPR potentially? No.
then that's broken up. So how do we handle that?
Typically on those events where we split the crew up for response need is obviously because extra hands are needed for a life-saving measure medically wise. And typically we will only send one crew member from that apparatus, and usually it either gets brought back by Alina EMS or a chief officer will make the decision to run to the hospital and pick them up and get them back in service in a timely manner.
Okay. I kind of covered the calls, what calls would we not respond to? Cat in a tree? Somebody calls directly instead of through 911, not an emergency. Do we have anything in place saying what calls we don't go on?
We're really limited by dispatch. If they page us,
If it's a 911 emergency call, I get that, but if they call direct and they're not using the 911 system,
Does that work? Do they do that?
they can do that. Typically, what we would do is direct them to call 911, because that way then the call is documented, and then dispatch can determine what resources to send. So that does happen.
In most cases, PD is kind of preempting a lot of this stuff too. They're usually the first on the scene and they're saying, all right, it's just a cat in a tree.
Correct.
I got it, or whatever.
and the police has the same. Sometimes it's a 911 call and police responds, and sometimes they call the non-emergency line at the police department for
And
something.
they don't use the stun guns.
It's not an
for cats,
emergency.
do they?
And I'd say I've been on the fire department for 17 years. I have not been to a cat in a tree call.
So it's pretty well vetted before you guys even get the call, because dispatch knows they're not gonna run you guys out there for nothing.
Right.
Well, and that's another issue that I have.
But
so
they might,
We'll
just in
get to
case.
that one. We will definitely get to that one.
Dispatch, yeah.
Response time. Many areas are not close to emergency rooms, urgent cares, clinics. Shakopee's blessed. We got all the above right here centrally located in town. While a fast response time sounds good, the reality is that doesn't speed up the actual treatment, as the waiting times at these facilities is lengthy, as you pointed out, and anybody that's been to an
The
emergency
first
room.
response that counts, it's the
I
first few
understand that, I
minutes.
understand that. Let me finish this. The more serious type stuff, stroke, heart attack, choking, anaphylactic, I'm sure there's a lot of other ones, massive bleeding, pregnancy, these types of things. This is the type of calls that are critical for the fast emergency response. But there's other calls that are not as critical, and they're not gauged on a time response, but rather a outcome of the event, timing, or indicator, I guess you would call it. Somewhere in here, there needs to be a much larger fix beyond Shakopee's control and Alina's, because the larger system is deficient at a massive scale. And I think I think Alina is being a little bit on a positive side to say 4 or 5 years to fix this. The reality is, if you go to the emergency room, even by ambulance, you're going to sit in the hallway for quite a while. And in many cases, they turn around and ship you into another ambulance and send you up to the cities.
That's nothing that Alina or the city can do
No, I'm
anything
just
about.
pointing out there's bigger issues that need to be fixed in a larger scale in the medical industry. Next is, the study indicated that Shakopee has an extremely low call volume. They noted that in the study, and I'm going to assume, and this is clearly an assumption, that the not major emergency response calls, a lot of people get in their car and drive right up there because we have these convenient emergency room, urgent care, whatever, close by. But I would say farther out, if you go just a little bit to the next ring out and into the third ring out, and Alina can speak to this, the response times are much longer. And in some cases, it's quite a while. So I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more on that because, we're looking at it just from Shakopee and these surrounding areas, but,
But there's population densities, they're gonna sit in the
there are
denser areas.
There's population densities that have much worse situations. So Alina can discuss that in more detail. Then the other thing I had was how do we get to a better coordinated effort through dispatch and dispatching of calls? Now, some are ambulance only, some are police only, some are fire only, some are multiple agency responses, police, fire, and medical. And I'm trying to figure out how we get a better handle on that with, I don't want to throw dispatch under the bus because they've got a difficult job. Usually the people that they're dealing with on the emergency call they're hysterical, they're a lot of concern, they're anxious. There's a lot of things going on, and this dispatcher is trying to gather the pertinent information needed between this hysteria. Because it seems, I'm concerned about allocating a whole bunch of resources when they're not needed, but allocating them when they're needed, because I'm trying to see it as an efficient, effective manner of the people and the
I just don't
equipment.
think the city council is experts in how to
Well, I'm not
deploy
either,
fire
and I'm
assets.
not asking
They
us
have
to
the
be.
box alarms already set where and they're working with dispatch as best they can and first on the scene, but
I'm
if
not
we start
asking-
shaving off assets
I'm
for
not
money-
asking us to make them decisions. I'm asking the fire department, Alina, dispatch, police department to work together to try to figure out how to make this process better. Dispatch is only as good as the information they have and receive. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take these multiple agencies communicating, working together, including the dispatch, to make sure that they have effective means to doing these things. I mean, if everybody's going to sit back and say it's somebody else's problem, and nobody's looking at how to make things better, then fool on them.
As a professional fire department, as we grow and then have a full-time fire department, I think some of these ripples, I'll call them, will be smoothed out with just standard working together practices, rhythms, things like that, teamwork and camaraderie that you just build as a team. And I think some of that efficiencies is what you're getting at can be ironed out with some of that new leadership.
Well, absolutely, and it needs to be worked with both the ambulance side, the fire side, the police side, and the dispatch side. Them four entities need to be working some kind of a work group or something.
Like a
And
continuous improvement team.
Not just Shakopee. Mm-hmm. I would imagine all of Scott County, maybe it's a scale initiative, I don't know, but.
Mr. Mayor, can I touch on that real quick?
Sure.
Currently, that's already in place. Myself and Kurt meet once a month already to discuss any issues or just changes going on with the EMS trends, our agency response, both on his side and ours, and work through different scenarios and issues. And then Chief Simon just met with a work group that's the North Scott County Chiefs, which also has dispatch involved, Scott Haas from the emergency management side from Scott County. So those groups are already in place and well-established and moving forward in that progressive, positive nature. So
Okay,
the partnerships are there and strong.
okay.
Maybe highlight some of those winning moments and improvements and ship them back to us saying, hey, we got together and made a little efficiency here or there. That,
Right.
keep us informed.
And Mayor, in addition to that too, police has, the police department has gotten involved in our meetings as well. So they're at the table with us every month when
Okay.
we meet, so.
And what's your perspective on farther out rings and their response time and the issues that,
Are you talking about response times outside of the city or
well, if you
in the
go out to the,
townships?
if you go to the outer ring of the metro, I mean, when I talked with Kevin, is it? The outstate is really in dire straits because they don't have the hospitals located close to their communities. They don't have the urgent cares. They don't have ambulance services. They might have a satellite.
Service territory in some of our outstate areas, local outstate or?
So, Mr. Mayor, and council members, we cover areas like Hutchinson, Glencoe, St. Peter, New Ulm, Springfield. So pretty much west central Minnesota, we've got a large holding of operation in those areas overall. And all those were generally began through our relationship with those hospitals in those particular areas. We operate full-time. But they are limited, just like you had alluded to. And in those particular cities, we actually run some very good response times, but when you start looking at the Cortlands of the world, the Lampertons, the other smaller surrounding areas that are operating on volunteer or paid on call, that is very dicey with regards to some of those response times or even coverage. There are a lot of areas that we cover, daytime areas for particular municipalities across central Minnesota, simply because they don't have daytime coverage overall, which does thin out our resources and our response times overall. We do a lot of mutual aid to particular areas out in those areas. We do use a fair amount of mutual aid even here too as well, just simply because, as I alluded to, the resources are not what they had once been.
Ambulance services or?
Right, so we might use Metawakan, we may use North Memorial, we may use Hennepin. We're always kind of tracking where each other's vehicles are at overall or reaching out to who we can to get to them. And that's where that becomes kind of a long wait, is if these guys are waiting for mutual aid, particularly when it's a serious call. Now, those serious calls are few and far between, to be honest. About 80% of our calls are non-life-threatening, but those 15% that are very, very serious. So we do want to make sure that we do have, EMS in all of this is a utility. Whether you use it or not, you need it when you need it, right? You want that light switch to come on whether or not the air conditioning is running and everything else is running, right? And so we have to be prepared. And a lot of the cost that you are looking at is the cost of preparedness to respond to whatever this community needs, regardless of our ability to support that.
And I'll just simply add, and as we look at, it's very dangerous to compare Shakopee to rural Minnesota. And there's multiple reasons for that, but probably the biggest is that most of those rural communities have higher tax rates than we have. And they also get almost 50% of their budget from mutual aid.
And they get some from local government aid too.
And I'm sorry, local government aid, not mutual aid. And so LGA is a big part of their budgeting process. So they don't have the resources, and they don't have the ability to do anything about their current situations because they don't have those resources. We do. We have the resources. And as I said before, this is not something that's going to break Shakopee's bank.
And then the last thing I had on my list here was, I covered this one already, that was the partnership maximization. Does Alina have dedicated, and Councilor Whiting asked this, does Alina have dedicated ambulance resources for Shakopee area? How is a patient request to be taken to a different hospital handled? What does that do to the resources, and how are differing levels of ambulance personnel, i.e. EMR, EMT, paramedic, decided and dispatched or allocated? And then the controlled substance licensing and monitoring and liabilities on the, I don't know what they call the top ambulance service. Is that advanced life support or, so I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about that aspect of it. It's a lot of questions in one paragraph. I apologize, but
I'll hit what I can remember here of what you said. So as far as deployment of the trucks, we cover an area which includes Shakopee. So we have Prior Lake, Shakopee, Savage, Bloomington, and some of the surrounding townships. So we put a deployment plan together based on our demand and how, like Kevin was talking about before, of time of day, day of week, hour of the day, all of that, to determine when we put shifts on and the number of shifts that we have on. And those trucks basically move around. If they're not, or if we're busy, they will move around to put us in the best coverage point. So if we get to a point where we have one truck left, they're basically going to the middle of our service area, which covers those 3 cities south and Bloomington north, to be able to hopefully get to the next emergency the quickest, okay? The quickest the way they can. When we're fully have all the trucks available, there's not calls going on, yeah, there's typically a truck in Shakopee, 1 in Prior Lake, 3 in Bloomington. And additional on top of that, we have the airport and sometimes in Savage we have another truck there. It just depends on how many trucks we have on at a particular time.
okay.
Paramedics can give medications, correct? But EMTs can only do certain things?
Right, so ambulances are governed by the Minnesota Emergency Medical Service Regulatory Board. Our statute's 144E. Within that statute, it does set the regulatory components for what an ambulance must have depending on its certification level. So if it is an advanced life support license, which is what we have in this area, it minimally requires 1 paramedic and 1 EMT to meet that certification standard. Now, we do have the ability to have a complement of ambulances that are set up that way. We are also now, because of the staffing shortage, utilizing EMT ambulance setups or basic life support ambulance. So if you were to walk into our dispatch center, you would not be able to determine, other than perhaps the uniforms, any different than the county's dispatch. We are a secondary PSAP for all of our operation. That means all of the information that comes from 911 comes through. Our CAD is the same exact CAD, which is computer-aided dispatch. That whole process is the same as the county's. So we will evaluate that caller, and if that caller goes through our process and we find that it is somebody who twisted their ankle and just can't get to the hospital, right? We don't need to run lights and siren to that. If these guys are tied up, they may not need to have to go to that call, or perhaps it's just these guys are tied up. Law enforcement could go and check on them while we're coming along that way. We wouldn't necessarily have to tie up the advanced life support resource. So we're starting to change the model a little bit to fit within the regulatory so we can get the right resource to the right patient and also keep those advanced resources. If you were to compare EMS workers to hospital workers, a registered nurse, as you guys probably know, is at least a 2-year, if not a 4-year degree to become an RN. A paramedic is at about a 2-year process as well, and we have to maintain the same certification levels. We give medications. We do hold controlled substances. So we do carry a lot of different pain as well as medications for people who may be really having some significant mental health issues. Overall, so we can utilize a lot of different medications. Those are highly regulated by DEA, not necessarily Minnesota. Minnesota has some with the Minnesota Department of Pharmacy, but ultimately we do have to make sure we're in check with the DEA overall. That's a very regulated, governed process for us overall. EMTs are more akin to what would be a nursing assistant. It's usually about a 1-semester class at a MINSCU school. They have advanced first aid. They're taught some things they can use, medications like nitroglycerin for chest pain. They can give some albuterol medication or aerosol type medications. They can give just a couple other real basic medications, aspirin and so forth, and the epinephrine that I had mentioned for people having some sort of shock due to an anaphylaxis situation. So this is essentially considered tiered process, and that's really what we're working to. we do, like we had said, we really do work to make sure that we're hitting our staffing, and it's not hitting averages. We are looking at statistic numbers. If we want to hit all of our calls within that 10 minutes and 59 cents, 90% of the time or less. So if you look at the averages here in Shakopee, we average between 6 and 7 minutes on average. That average doesn't not necessarily tell you how well an ambulance service is providing service. Talking about Greater Minnesota, I'd mentioned that for this city, 90% of the time or less, we are on this call within 13 minutes, and that's from the time it hits our dispatch center, not the time the truck starts to roll. That's when it comes into our center. In Greater Minnesota, that 90th percentile is in the 20-minute timeline overall. So it is a very big difference.
Do you have the numbers on the outcomes in the difference of the time?
Right. So there have been a number of studies, and I'm sure Stuart likewise have seen these in the past, that try to determine whether or not response times and patient outcomes have some sort of correlation. The data is mixed on it. Far as emergency response, whether that 1 or 2 minutes, technically they've discerned does not necessarily make a difference in patient outcome. Right.
But emergency response, you talked about partnerships. This is where the EMTs fill out their response, because that emergency response is the quick response you need to start CPR,
It's the stabilizing
airway,
factor.
breathing, circulation, those emergency things. So that's why having that full-time force is actually enhancing and partnering better with them.
Right. Those are a small percentage of our calls, though, and they're absolutely time critical. Yeah. Absolutely, without a doubt, overall. So you do need that within that 4 to 5 minute time period. This is where law enforcement has really been very helpful, particularly carrying with AEDs. They can get that shock in as soon as possible. For every minute that somebody is in a rhythm, heart rhythm that is not producing blood, we lose 10% survivability. So over 5 minutes, you have 50% chance or less.
So the response times you were just talking about, that's where that factors
That's
in.
big time, absolutely big time. These guys out doing inspections, and they're called, they're getting a very quick response time. Occasionally, we will be right there, right place, right time, or, so we look at geographics very clearly, but our response times are going to be a little longer. They just are. So in those critical situations, it's absolutely critical. But in the other calls, not necessarily the case overall. So it is a mixed bag overall. But again, you are providing a blanket level coverage for your city, and that's, from my perspective, absolutely appropriate.
And it's got to be hard to differentiate between that through dispatch, especially with somebody that's...
Dispatch is constantly trying to determine what's going on.
Well, they're getting the same information that dispatch is getting in real time, because it goes directly to them.
So dispatch will actually get the information they need to get fire rolling, police going. We're not what we call CAD to CAD, meaning the person taking the information is putting it into the computer when that call comes in. So, for example, in Ramsey County, as soon as that person hits enter and it goes to law enforcement, the fire dispatcher, it automatically comes to us at the exact same time. Here we do have a little bit of lag because we do not have that CAD to CAD yet with the county. We're working towards that. So there is a little bit of lag in the time that takes to get that information out.
And where's the breakdown between CAD 2 with Scott County compared to Ramsey County?
Is that the same issues we're having?
Is it a software issue? Is it a policy decision?
It's not necessarily software, because we run the same CADs. It's a matter of making the connectivity for that, and that again is something that we are working to do. We connect with, right now we connect with about 35 different PSAPs across the state, and of those in the metro, I think we have 7 of those that are just all CAD to CAD. So we don't necessarily talk to them, we just get the information, comes into our CAD, call pops up, we dispatch it.
Is their system doesn't have that capability?
Not at this point.
No. Okay.
Not at this point. But
Well, I just had one part that wasn't answered, and that was, how is a patient requesting to go to a different hospital handled, and what does that do to your resources?
so for us, the honest answer to that, it depends on the agency. For Illini EMS, if it's within the metro area, we'll take that patient to wherever they want to go overall. So the only exceptions to that is if we have bad weather and we go to the closest hospital divert. So we would typically go into here, we'd be taking most of those to St. Francis here for us. But otherwise, we take patients where they want to go. So if they want to go to the VA, yes, we will take them to the VA. If they want to go to Lakeview and Stillwater, We would probably still even do that. Now, that does take the resource out of our deployment
Do
for
you
this
change
area.
resources at times?
What's that?
Do you change resources at times? I'm
Go to the BLS then, or?
I'm just going to use my mother as an example. Okay, she had a stroke. The ambulance came. I was there. She wanted to go directly to Abbott, I think it was.
Okay.
Which is where she had her primary stuff for them kind of issues. And I don't know if that same ambulance actually took her there, because by the time I got my act together and ran up there after her, it could have been a different ambulance with less.
Right, and that too will depend. So if Abbott wants the patient and the patient is at St. Francis and we brought her there first, sometimes that happens where they open up that care that she needs to go to this other hospital.
Right.
That same ambulance that delivered her may not be the same one. Now, again, we watch, our primary focus is the 911 side. We add additional resources to help do transfer work beyond the demand for 911, right? So that another ambulance, and we may have to tell them to wait, you know, because we're not going to drop down by a certain level of coverage for the city
Right.
to do the transfer work. So we're always balancing out that difference overall.
Okay.
So we may not be doing that with the same crew.
And you had 8 ambulances at the Burnsville event? Was it just your outfit?
Just
or-
ours, yeah, we had 8 from the original response.
And was there others from other entities?
Over the course of the week or 2 weeks, when we continued to cover them, yes, we had a number of agencies that helped with that overall, but the initial response, we had 8 resources on there.
All right. Okay.
Earlier, just a moment ago, it was alluded to, there was some lag time between the county and your system. Can anyone speak up onto the possibility of their network being outdated? Because I see here,
That's what I was thinking too.
Don't they have fiber? does that
finding
not matter?
13, call processing performance by Scott County's 911 dispatch center is significantly lower, substantially lower than any nationally recommended best practice. Then I've also been told that their system is archaic. Is that true?
You want to touch on that, or, I mean, the LETG?
You go ahead.
Issues with LETG.
I think we've already.
I don't know if we want to
So it's
travel
a
down that
software
road tonight, we
program.
can't do anything about it.
But the county is in the process of transferring away from LETG. Frankly, I wish it would have happened years ago, but that process is ongoing at this point. We all know issues with LETG. I don't think we need to go
They've
down
got
that
the
rabbit
fiber,
hole.
so it's not the connection, is the LEGT or whatever you call it, is that a program, a software program?
LETG.
Support, I think,
It's a what?
the support of that program in
So it's a-
multiple
it's a
issues.
program.
Yeah, would you categorize it as the whole package?
Yeah, it's the
It's a program?
package, the essential package that
It's basically a program,
The program on a computer, which I call software, but I'm old school.
but
so.
it might be more than that, I don't know.
All right,
So just to comment on the dispatch side of it, for Alina in particular, when a medical does come in, we are getting about 63 to 65% of the callers given directly to us so they can go through, so our dispatch can go through the emergency medical dispatch.
So they're going to your dispatch.
So they get forwarded to our dispatch almost right away once they determine that it's a medical, and then they get more questions, and so we can break down what resources are potentially needed at that point,
okay, 63%,
which is actually pretty good.
right,
It's,
okay.
We haven't heard from Jim or Angelica here too much.
Fire away.
Most of my questions were answered as far as one about the relationship partnerships, and you answered that. Just one general question though, airlift, is that a line or is that like hospital responsibility?
So we don't operate air ambulance Alina. We partner with LifeLink as a consortium member to that organization overall. But otherwise, we really don't care whether it is LifeLink North or Mayo, as far as response goes. Our dispatch center does a very good job at identifying the closest unit, working with those partners.
They work it the same way, it's per transport?
For billing, yes, that's correct. But they charge a lot more.
Call if there's gonna be a LifeLink helicopter.
Get some in there.
That's usually done either by a command officer from fire or from EMS staff on scene. And usually it has to pertain with distance from the closest hospital for like a level 1 trauma or time for an extrication to take place. So there might be a bad crash or a hard access to an area, like you take Louisville Swamp, where we have a cardiac arrest, then it's gonna be another 15 minutes to get them up and out of there while we're doing CPR. We'll choose to start air just because everything is getting delayed. But ultimately, it's working as a team and kind of working through that, best angles to provide that level of care.
Okay, I hear they're expensive.
They are.
Angelica?
I don't have any questions. I'm just glad to hear that the partnerships obviously have been there, and you guys are, working strongly doing that. Again, we saw the results from Citygate. I'm just ready to start seeing the changes. I mean, they're the professionals, so I don't want to be here and try to destroy what they're telling us. It's like, let's work what we have already, what the results are. So it's like, let's work.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jesse. I think our point is put the money there for them,
Yeah.
though.
I'm using the Citygate study as kind of like a guide, a starting point. I know there's suggestions, there's recommendations. Stewart's, or the company is speaking from statistics and all that stuff. My main concern for the city of Shakopee is that we have trucks that are manned for the ability to enter a building. That there's no wait to say, we can't go in there to get you because we have to wait. Our protocol is to have XYZ in place before we can do that. And then also response to a situation by 100% qualified staff in a medical emergency. So that's my level of expectations that we should use as a guideline of what can we do to make sure that that happens. With that 24-hour model, I think that that's gonna help. And also, too, in terms of a recruitment aspect, would you not agree that that would help us expand the requirement of living within the Shakopee city limits? We would be, if we did a full-time model where you're employed by us 24 hours, we can hire someone from Eden Prairie or further out that want to come work here.
That's correct. Yep.
You bring up a good point, though, Jesse. That could be policy we make. Are we going to hire from within to start with? Are we going to, as we grow these positions, is that going to be our goal? Are we going to open it up to get the best candidate? We've had a fire department that's been our family for years, and I would like to see those folks get the opportunity to get that job. But I don't want to lose out. So maybe a policy decision from this board might be, initially, we want to fill these positions out with, 60, 75% internal candidates. Bill, is that an issue?
So we just filled a position, and for the first time ever, we actually had a board that ranked our own people for a full-time position. We have that list in effect right now. This is as good a point as any for me to bring up the fact, I will always look at everything with the fiscal lens. And that's why there are some things that I have not made a decision to bring forward to council. However, I will say that I believe that it is important, as Citygate has pointed out, and as our interim chief has been begging me to move forward on, is to have 2 more full-time firefighters brought forward into the organization. And I will end up doing that in the next several months for council to make a decision on that. I do believe at this point, again, I'm to be honest, there's some things about the Citygate study and in the long-term plan I'm not sure is fiscally viable for us as an organization. But I will say that certainly those 2 recommended ASAP firefighters is certainly something that at this point I'm going to be bringing forward for council's decision.
The 140, was it 144E or 141E?
24 on, 24 off?
It's just 144E?
For our statute, yes.
Okay. And if I was to look that up, where would I look? Is it a state or federal?
You go to the state
State, I can find it
revisor's
if it's a-
office website, and
I
then
can
you just,
find it in the state. I just
Yes.
didn't know if it was higher up than that. And then over here, the deputy chief roles, after there's a fire chief, are they working firefighters, part-time,
Battalion chief?
three-quarter time? No, the deputy chiefs.
The two gentlemen that are right here at the table?
What's your role once there's a full-time fire chief? Are you not part of the equation of the manpower available?
Our job description still requires that we can perform the duties of a firefighter, and we're expected to do that. Our new positions are salaried positions, so we work a Monday through Friday. If we're needed night and weekends for coverage or for responding to calls, we're available as needed.
You guys have a focus, like training
Well,
and
absolutely.
operations, right?
Absolutely.
To touch on your question too, Mayor, is that our roles primarily focus on that command side, that span of control over our firefighters. So any emergency, whether it's a car crash to a fully involved building structure fire, requires very specific people in place for running command, a division, safety, accountability. And to kind of hit Councilman Laura's point is that load of having that effectiveness for, heavens forbid that we have an emergency ourselves inside a structure, and having that team in place to be able to make a save on our own firefighters, let alone a victim inside too, is very important, because that requires an exponentially more workforce to be able to get a firefighter out than just a victim that's maybe in a bathroom.
Right, but it's, your positions are not 100% administrative.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, operational and administrative.
It's Friday night, your shift is over, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, whatever it is. Major event in Shakopee, you're coming in to do your function.
Yes.
Control.
Yep.
If I may, Mayor, this might be a good time to help you guys explain to us, maybe break down, what does a captain mean? What does a battalion chief mean? Like,
Yeah, so typically a crew that's working on a fire truck would have a captain in charge of that crew. That captain and firefighters make up that crew. They're on their shift together, they're working together. The captain is responsible for those firefighters. He or she would be their supervisor, and training them during the day when they're not responding to calls. What else am I missing?
General day-to-day tasks, scheduling, making sure that inspections are getting fulfilled
But
and all that
battalion
stuff.
chief is more incident command and organizing
So
units.
typically, a battalion chief would be in charge of multiple units or multiple stations. So if you had 2 stations staffed, you'd have a battalion chief that would be responsible for both, responding much like Deputy Chief Giddings and I do in a smaller vehicle, a command vehicle, and then act as in charge or in command of a incident.
So in the Citygate study, when we talk about 2027, 3 battalion chiefs, we're talking two stations at that point. Is that correct, Bill or Stuart?
You're looking at, and that would be then one for each rotation.
Right. To manage both
Correct.
units, okay, or stations.
So in the interim, and obviously that would all need to be approved, but we have myself and Deputy Chief Giddings and also the fire chief that would respond from home for those incidents.
I have a lot to say. Also, we also, as a council, need to keep in mind that come 2025, 6, 7, those houses, we have Lennar houses going up to the south, we have houses going up in DR Horton. The demand is just increasing more. So there's going to be a point in time that we're probably, would you agree that we're going to see the second firehouse staffed like we would the first one? Like you're going to have a crew station there as well?
Or you'd have a third satellite.
Well, and that's
staff.
that's going to bring me to my next point. So in that study, it said, what did it say? It says, continuing significant growth in Shakopee to the east and the township growth in the west and south could drive the need for a third or even 4th smaller neighborhood station, which would be staffed by a fire engine each. My next question is then, with that statement, is what are we doing on a city level in terms of development? Are taking that into consideration? I know, maybe we might never need it, but are we thinking of spots where we're reserving a spot where it could go? Are we making plans for that?
I would say that we're in the process of walking.
We had that conversation a couple times.
We did.
And in the past, we actually were going to build fire station number 3 over in the Southbridge area. But the more we looked at it, it just wasn't needed fully at this point. The reality is that we have a Savage station that is literally across the road almost from
McCall. It's on McCall there.
it's on McCall.
Yep.
And we couldn't staff it.
But at some point, I think that with the growth that we see out west, yes. Is that in the near-term future? I don't think it's in the near-term future. I think that it certainly is something that as we continue to grow, long after I'm gone, that'll be someone making that decision.
Right. I mean, and that's things that we do have to consider too when we're putting all these things in place. And also too, like, I would hate to see all this development we're approving and all of a sudden I'm like, oh crap, we don't have room for a fire station and we need one right here. Like, are we taking out a park or what to make room? So it's just things like that to consider. Also something that we might, I don't know, I just had thought of this at one point is, how we require park dedication funds. Would it be something we could consider to maybe take 75% park dedication, 25% public safety to use towards another fire station?
We can't legally do that.
Okay, I don't know. Nope. There are ideas that roll in my head. Okay.
Not unless state legislation changed that and allowed
Well,
it, but right
if
now.
Mr. Tab is
Correct.
listening.
Right now, 10% of the
Yeah.
land or the value equivalent is required to be utilized for park.
Okay.
But you're right, we
But-
should be planning ahead.
Yeah.
So we should be planning ahead, and to your point, that's actually how we built Fire Station 2. That used to be parkland.
We got spanked for that.
Yeah.
So if I can jump in, Mr. Mayor, I think what you brought up with the 2 firefighters, and I know we're not making any decisions tonight, but from my point of view, you have the support for me for the 2 firefighters and the 2025 budget, and we'll look at 2026 when it comes up. If that gives you any room to move on.
Will we see the, I guess, potential budget for next year before, after we see ask for the the 2 new firemen come in? Are we seeing about the same time, or, I mean, you mentioned there may be a tax break, but if you add this back in, then we're kind of, I don't know where that comes along, breaking even, or?
What he's asking, Mr. Reynolds, is will we have a budget workshop prior to the first go-around with the budget?
No. We won't I'm going to bring these firefighter positions in the next month or so. And it's also important to understand that we have an exceptionally healthy reserve. It's at the very top of what it can be at over 50%. So, this is something that we can do, and then we would build it into the 2025 budget.
But we'll have conversations about 2025 budget all through the summer.
Yeah, and we're just now starting, we just, in the last month, got our latest figures from the county, which allows us to start that process. We're actually starting the CIP process coming up in a week or two as well, but that will all be brought forward over the summer and early fall.
So does Lina have any questions for us or our fire department?
Mr. Mayor, Council, I don't think we have any further questions. Just want to thank you for allowing us to be a part of your work group and answer any questions that we can, and we're always available for any further questions that you would have.
And let us thank you for serving our community in the capacity that you do.
We don't get you to the table very often, so thank you for being a part of our community and being a part of our team here, so thanks.
And this, us being at the table should be a testament to the partnership that we do have with the fire department and the police department at this point, so.
And if you ever have input for how to improve these things, I know part of it was the software program, whatever it is, with dispatch. Please share that information with our staff and council.
The continuous improvement team that you've put together, and maybe you can expand on that, that's great.
Absolutely. And I would have to assume that other areas within Scott County, since they're all using Scott County Dispatch, probably have the same issues, and it might be something for scale to talk about. But at any rate, if there's nothing else, we can go on to item number 5, any other business. Okay. Item number 6.
You want to do it? Okay.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to Tuesday, May 7th, 2024 at 7 PM.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Over there at the note keeper? Yes. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion?
No.
Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.